What if a lonely millionaire discovered he had a grandson living on the streets, and his world changed forever? Michael Carter stood alone in the cold, grey cemetery, a fresh bouquet of white lilies trembling in his hands. The crisp autumn wind whispered through the trees, scattering leaves across the silent rows of headstones. But Michael barely noticed. His gaze was locked on a single grave, a polished granite marker etched with the name David Carter. It had been 5 years since the accident. 5 long years of empty mansions, silent dinners, and a heart weighed down by regret. David had been his only son, his pride, his joy, and Michael had lost him in an instant. A drunk driver, a slick road, a blinding flash, and just like that, the world had gone dark. Every Sunday, without fail, Michael came here. It was the one place where he allowed himself to really feel the crushing weight of his grief, the one place where he didn't have to pretend to be the powerful, untouchable billionaire that the world saw. He knelt, carefully placing the white lilies at the base of the headstone. "Hello, David," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "I brought your favorite flowers." For a moment, silence. Just the wind, the soft rustle of leaves, and the distant call of a bird. But then, out of the corner of his eye, Michael noticed something. Someone. A small figure sat cross-legged in front of the headstone, just a few rows over. A boy, no older than 10, his clothes tattered, his face smudged with dirt, his hair wild and unkempt. He looked like he had been living on the streets. Michael's brow furrowed. Who was this boy, and why was he here in a private cemetery, of all places? Clearing his throat, Michael called out, "Hey kid, what are you doing here?" The boy's head snapped up, wide eyes locking onto Michael's. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Michael, tall and imposing in his tailored coat, and the boy, small and fragile, but with a spark of defiance in his gaze. Then, without a word, the boy scrambled to his feet and bolted, disappearing into the dense woods that bordered the cemetery. Michael stood frozen, the flowers slipping from his grasp. His heart raced, not just from the boy's sudden flight, but from something else. Something about the boy's eyes. Something that gnawed at the edges of his mind. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. The image of the boy haunted him. His thin frame, his dirty clothes, but most of all, his eyes. Eyes that seemed familiar, though Michael couldn't quite place why. He needed answers. The next morning, Michael picked up his phone and called Henry Collins. His trusted private investigator, Henry had handled countless delicate matters for Michael over the years, business disputes, personal concerns, even a few scandals swept quietly under the rug. "Henry, I need you to find someone for me," Michael said, his voice firm but tinged with urgency. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Who is it?" Henry's voice was calm, professional. "A boy. About 10 years old. I saw him at the cemetery yesterday. Dirty clothes. Looked like he's been living rough. I want to know who he is, where he came from. Everything." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Understood. I'll get on it right away." As Michael ended the call, he stared out of his office window, the city skyline stretching endlessly before him, but his mind was far from his empire of glass towers and luxury cars. It was back at that quiet, tree-lined cemetery, and on that boy. Days passed, each one longer than the last. Michael tried to focus on his business meetings, on his endless emails and conference calls, but the boy's face wouldn't leave his mind. Who was he? Why had he been at the graveyard? And why did his eyes feel so familiar? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Henry called back, "Mr. Carter, I've got something." Michael's heart raced. "Go on." "The boy's name is Ethan. He's been living on the streets with his mother, Grace Mitchell. They've been moving from place to place, trying to stay under the radar, but here's the interesting part. Ethan has been visiting that cemetery regularly for months. Michael's grip tightened on the phone. Why? Why would a street kid visit my son's grave? I don't know yet, but I can find out. Do it, Michael ordered, his voice firm. But even as he gave the command, a cold sense of dread settled over him. Because deep down, some part of him already knew there was more to this boy than a simple stranger. Much more. And Michael Carter wasn't ready for the truth that was about to shatter his world. Michael Carter couldn't get the boy out of his mind. Days had passed since that strange encounter at the cemetery, but the image of the dirty, frightened child lingered like a shadow. Every night, as Michael sat in his grand, silent mansion, he found himself staring at the empty chair that had once belonged to his son, David. But now, his thoughts were consumed by the boy Ethan. Who was Ethan? Why had he been sitting at David's grave, and what was his connection to the place? Michael's impatience grew with each passing day. He called Henry Collins, his private investigator, every morning for updates, but the news was always the same. Henry was searching, following leads, but there were no concrete answers yet. Finally, a week after that strange encounter, the call came. "Mr. Carter, I have news." Henry's voice was steady but tinged with concern. "The boy's name is Ethan. He's living with his mother, Grace Mitchell. They've been moving from place to place, staying under the radar." "Under the radar?" Michael's voice tightened. "Are they hiding from someone?" "It's hard to say," Henry admitted. "But from what I've gathered, Grace has been struggling for years. No stable job, no steady home. And Ethan, he's been visiting the cemetery for months, always the same grave your son's." Michael's chest tightened. "Why? What does he want?" "That's what I'm still trying to find out," Henry replied. "But I managed to track them to an old abandoned warehouse on the east side of the city. It's not a safe place, Mr. Carter. If you want to meet them, I'd advise caution." Michael didn't hesitate. Grabbing his coat, he stepped into his sleek black sedan and drove through the bustling city streets, his mind racing. He didn't know why he was so desperate to see this boy again, only that he needed answers. As he approached the warehouse, the once familiar feeling of control that Michael always had seemed to slip away. The building was a crumbling ruin. Broken windows, graffiti-stained walls, the faint smell of damp and decay. This was where they lived? Michael stepped out of his car, his expensive shoes crunching on broken glass. He called out, his voice echoing through the empty, dark corridors. "Hello? Is anyone here?" Silence. For a moment, Michael thought he was alone. But then, from the shadows, a small figure emerged. It was Ethan. His wide, wary eyes met Michael's, and for an instant, they simply stared at each other. "Ethan," Michael whispered, his voice softer now. But before he could say anything else, another figure stepped out from the darkness. A woman, thin, weary, her face lined with hardship, but her gaze fierce and protective. This had to be Grace. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "My name is Michael Carter," he replied, trying to keep his tone calm. "I saw your son at the cemetery. At my son's grave. I just want to understand why." Grace's expression shifted, a flash of shock crossing her face. She glanced at Ethan, who looked down at his worn shoes, avoiding Michael's gaze. "We didn't mean any harm," Grace finally said, her voice softer now. "We were just remembering." "Remembering?" Michael's brow furrowed. "But how could you possibly? Because David, your son, he was Ethan's brother." The words fell from Grace's lips like stones. Michael's world seemed to tilt. He staggered back, his mind racing. What are you saying?" "David didn't know," Grace continued, her voice trembling. "I was pregnant when he died. I never had the chance to tell him." A cold, hollow silence settled between them. Michael's gaze shifted to Ethan, his mind reeling. This boy, this fragile, frightened child, was his grandson. "Why didn't you tell me?" Michael whispered, his voice a mix of shock, anger, and pain. "I was scared," Grace admitted. "After David died, I didn't know what to do. I had no one. And I didn't think you'd believe me. I thought you'd think I was after your money." Michael's heart ached. He had spent years burying himself in wealth and power, shutting out the world, shutting out the pain of losing David, and in doing so, he had shut out the only family he had left. "And Ethan?" he asked, his gaze softening as he looked at the boy. Ethan's eyes finally met his. There was fear there, but also something else, a quiet, desperate hope. I just wanted to see where my brother was buried," Ethan whispered. "Mom told me about him. I just wanted to know." Tears burned in Michael's eyes. He took a step forward, then another, kneeling down so he was at eye level with Ethan. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't know." Grace's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, none of them spoke. Only the quiet, broken stillness of the warehouse surrounded them. But then, Michael reached out, gently placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You're coming with me," he said firmly. "Both of you. You don't have to live like this anymore." Michael Carter's world had turned upside down. Ethan wasn't just a stranger, not just some boy wandering the cemetery. He was his grandson. The revelation crashed over Michael like a tidal wave, leaving him breathless and overwhelmed. But there was no time to waste. Michael brought Grace and Ethan to his home, a sprawling estate that seemed like another world compared to the crumbling warehouse they had been living in. The grand foyer, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, seemed to swallow them as they stepped inside. Grace hesitated at the doorway, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and uncertainty. "Are you sure? Are you sure we belong here?" she whispered, clutching Ethan's hand. "Of course you do," Michael replied, trying to sound confident. But even he wasn't sure. He had spent so many years alone, his heart wrapped in a shell of grief and regret. Now, suddenly, his life was filled with two people he barely knew, but who were a part of him. He led them through the mansion, showing them the guest rooms, the kitchen, the garden. But the more he showed, the more uncomfortable Grace seemed. "Mr. Carter," she finally said, stopping in the hallway, "this is too much. We don't belong in a place like this." Michael paused, turning to face her. "Grace, please. You and Ethan are family. And I've missed too much already. I don't want to miss any more." Grace's expression softened slightly, but there was still caution in her eyes. I don't want Ethan to think this is his life now, only to lose it later. I don't want him to get hurt." "I understand," Michael nodded. "But I promise you, as long as you're here, you're safe, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you both have a better life." Ethan's wide eyes wandered across the grand hallway, his small fingers gripping his mother's sleeve. He looked overwhelmed, but also curious. A part of him seemed excited, but another part, afraid. As the days passed, Michael tried to make them feel at home. He had a room prepared for Ethan, a bright, cozy space with a bed, a bookshelf full of children's books, and a window that overlooked the garden. He even bought toys, though he had no idea what a 10-year-old would like. But Grace remained distant, and Ethan was quiet, always looking around as if he expected someone to tell him to leave. Michael could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the fear that this was all temporary. One evening, as Michael sat in his study, staring at a photograph of David, his son, he felt a pang of guilt. Had he made a mistake? Was he trying to replace David with Ethan? Or was he just trying to ease his own loneliness? A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Grace stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, a hesitant look on her face. "Michael, can we talk?" she asked quietly. "Of course, please, come in." He gestured to the chair across from him, but Grace remained standing. I just want to be clear. I'm grateful for everything you've done. Really, I am. But I don't want Ethan to think he has to be someone he's not. I don't want him to feel like he has to live up to David." Michael's chest tightened. I'm not trying to replace David, he whispered. I know, Grace said, her voice softening. But it's hard for both of us. I've spent years trying to protect Ethan, to give him a normal life, even if it was difficult, and now we're here, in this palace, and it doesn't feel real. Michael leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a moment. It doesn't feel real for me either, he admitted. I've spent so long trying to forget, trying to bury the pain, and now, here you are, both of you, and I don't want to lose you. Grace's expression softened. She stepped forward, sitting down in the chair. We're not going anywhere, but we need time. Ethan needs time. I understand. Michael managed a small smile. I'm not very good at this family thing. Neither am I, Grace admitted, a faint smile touching her lips. But we'll figure it out. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, cautiously, Grace and Ethan began to settle in. Ethan grew more comfortable, exploring the garden, flipping through the books in his room. Michael spent time with him, trying to teach him how to play chess, though Ethan mostly just moved the pieces around without understanding the rules. But it was a start. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Michael and Ethan sat on the back porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. Grandpa? Ethan's small voice broke the quiet. Michael's heart skipped a beat. It was the first time Ethan had called him that. Yes, Ethan? Did my dad... Was he brave? Ethan asked, his eyes fixed on the sky. Michael smiled, a mix of pride and sadness filling his chest. Yes, Ethan. Your dad was very brave and kind. He had a big heart just like you. Ethan smiled, a shy, hopeful smile. I hope I can be like him. You already are, Michael whispered. As the stars began to twinkle above, Michael felt a warmth in his heart that he hadn't felt in years. The darkness of grief still lingered, but now there was a light, a small, flickering light of hope, and he wasn't going to let it go. Michael Carter's life began to change in quiet, unexpected ways. Days turned into weeks, and the grand, empty mansion that had once echoed with silence now carried the faint, joyful sounds of life, the soft patter of Ethan's feet running through the hallways, Grace's gentle laughter as she tried to help her son with his homework, and Michael's own voice, warmer and lighter than it had been in years. But beneath this new warmth, there was still a lingering tension. Grace, despite her polite smiles and quiet gratitude, remained cautious. Michael could sense it in the way she kept her distance, always careful not to ask for too much, always prepared to leave. One evening, as they sat together in the sunlit dining room, Michael watched as Grace gently coaxed Ethan to eat his vegetables. The boy pouted, but eventually gave in, and Michael couldn't help but smile. Thank you for letting us stay here, Grace said softly, not meeting his eyes. But I need to be honest. I'm still not sure if we belong here. Of course you belong here, Michael replied, his voice firm but gentle. Your family, and I want you to stay. Grace's gaze finally lifted, her eyes searching his. But for how long? Until you decide it's too much. Until you change your mind. Michael felt a pang of guilt. He understood her fear. He had swept them out of poverty and into a life of luxury. But trust couldn't be bought. It had to be earned. I don't expect you to trust me completely, Michael admitted. Not yet, but I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. And neither are you. Not unless you choose to. Grace's shoulders relaxed slightly, but the doubt didn't entirely leave her eyes. The next morning, as Michael prepared for another day of business meetings, he noticed Ethan standing by the window, staring out at the garden with a thoughtful expression. Everything okay, Ethan? Michael asked, setting down his briefcase. Ethan nodded slowly. It's just... Sometimes I feel like I'm dreaming, like we don't really belong here. Michael's heart ached. Kneeling down beside his grandson, he gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. You do belong here, Ethan. You and your mom. This is your home now." Ethan turned, his wide eyes searching Michael's face. "Do you promise?" "I promise," Michael whispered. But promises were easier made than kept. Over the next few weeks, Michael struggled to balance his growing bond with Ethan and Grace against the weight of his business empire. He spent long hours at the office, buried in paperwork and endless meetings, trying to ensure that his vast fortune remained intact. And Grace noticed. One evening, as Michael returned home, exhausted from a particularly grueling day, he found Grace waiting for him in the living room. Her arms were crossed, and her expression was a mix of frustration and worry. "We need to talk," she said simply. Michael set his briefcase aside, feeling a knot form in his stomach. "What's wrong?" "It's Ethan," Grace began, her voice wavering slightly. He thinks you don't want him here, that you're too busy, that we're just a burden." Michael's heart sank. "That's not true. I've been trying to keep everything together, to make sure you both have everything you need." "But that's just it," Grace insisted. "He doesn't need your money, Michael. He needs you. He needs to feel like he's part of your life, not just a guest in your house." Michael stood in stunned silence. How had he been so blind, so caught up in his work, in his own sense of responsibility, that he had forgotten the most important thing being there? I didn't realize," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. Grace's expression softened. "You're a good man, Michael, but you've spent so long hiding behind your work that I don't think you know how to just be with people anymore." The words stung, but they were true. Michael had spent years building his empire, but in doing so, he had walled himself off from everyone around him, even his own son. But this time, he wasn't going to make the same mistake. The next day, Michael cleared his schedule. He called his assistant and cancelled every meeting, every call, and spent the entire day with Ethan. They played soccer in the garden, baked cookies in the kitchen, though they burned half of them, and even sat together in the study as Michael showed Ethan his favorite old books. Ethan's laughter echoed through the mansion, bright and full of joy, and Michael found himself laughing too, a deep, genuine laugh he hadn't heard in years. That night, as Michael tucked Ethan into bed, the boy looked up at him with a sleepy smile. "Grandpa?" "Yes, Ethan?" "Today was the best day ever." Michael's heart swelled with warmth. "I'm glad, Ethan. And there will be plenty more days like this, I promise." As he stepped out of the room, Michael found Grace standing in the hallway, a soft smile on her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Michael shook his head. "No, Grace. Thank you for reminding me what really matters." And as the days continued, Michael didn't just make time for Ethan. He made time for Grace, too. They talked, they laughed, they shared stories of David, of their struggles, of their dreams. Little by little, the cold, empty mansion became a home. And for the first time in a long time, Michael Carter felt alive. As the days turned into weeks, a fragile but growing sense of warmth settled into Michael Carter's home. Ethan laughed more easily now, his wide eyes sparkling with curiosity as he explored the mansion's endless hallways and vast garden. Grace, too, seemed to soften. She smiled more, she spoke more freely, and even Michael felt his guarded heart begin to thaw. But beneath this newfound joy, an old fear lingered, a fear Michael didn't want to acknowledge, but couldn't ignore. He was afraid of losing them. One evening, as the autumn leaves danced in the cool breeze outside, Michael stood at the window of his study, watching the garden bathed in the soft golden light of the setting sun. His mind wandered back to the last time he had felt this alive, back when David was still here, his son, his pride, his greatest joy, and his greatest regret. "Grandpa?" Ethan's small voice pulled Michael from his thoughts. Michael turned to see the boy standing in the doorway, clutching a small drawing in his hands. "Can I come in?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide and hopeful. "Of course, Ethan." Michael gestured to the large leather chair beside his desk. "What do you have there?" Ethan smiled. holding up the drawing. It was a picture of three figures standing beneath a bright, shining sun. A tall man, a woman, and a boy, all holding hands. Above them, written in bright, colorful letters, were the words, "My family." "It's us," Ethan explained, his voice brimming with pride. "You, me, and Mom." Michael's heart swelled and his eyes grew misty. He gently took the drawing, staring at it as if it were a priceless treasure. "It's beautiful, Ethan," he whispered, "just like our family." Do you think Dad can see us?" Ethan asked suddenly, his voice growing quieter. "Do you think he knows we're all together now?" Michael's chest tightened. "I believe he does. And I think he's smiling." Ethan's smile grew, and he reached out, wrapping his small arms around Michael in a warm hug. Michael held the boy close, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. But even as he cherished this moment, a part of him remained afraid that this happiness was fragile, afraid that, at any moment, it could all disappear. And that fear only grew when, one crisp Saturday morning, Michael's phone rang. It was Henry Collins, his private investigator. "Mr. Carter, I thought you should know. I've received some troubling information." Michael's grip tightened on the phone. "What is it?" "It's about Grace," Henry explained, his voice cautious. "There are rumors, people who claim she's taken advantage of wealthy men before, that she finds ways into their lives, and then disappears." Michael's heart raced. "That's ridiculous. She's nothing like that." "I understand, sir. But I thought you should be aware. You've brought her and the boy into your home, and I just wanted to ensure you're protected." As the call ended, Michael stood in his study, a cold sense of dread settling over him. Could it be true? Could Grace be lying to him? Could she be using him? But then he thought of Ethan's bright, innocent smile, of Grace's quiet courage, of the way they had struggled to survive in that crumbling warehouse. It didn't make sense. Still, doubt gnawed at him. That evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, Michael found himself watching Grace more closely. He noticed the way she seemed hesitant to ask for anything, the way she carefully avoided talking about her past. Was she hiding something? "Grace," Michael said suddenly, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. "Can I ask you something?" She looked up, a touch of surprise in her eyes. "Of course. Why didn't you ever try to find me?" "After David died, why didn't you tell me about Ethan?" Grace's expression softened, a hint of sadness in her gaze. "I was scared, Michael. I was alone, and I didn't think you'd believe me. I thought you'd think I was just after your money." Michael's heart ached. "And now?" "Now, I still worry," Grace admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But not about you. I worry about Ethan. I worry that one day this will all disappear, that one day you'll realize we're not good enough, or that you'll decide we don't belong here." Silence settled over the table. "I would never do that," Michael whispered. "You and Ethan. Your family." Tears filled Grace's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "Family," she repeated, as if testing the word on her tongue. After dinner, Michael retreated to his study, staring at Ethan's drawing. His family. The family he had lost, and the family he was so afraid of losing again. The next morning, Michael made a decision. He called Henry Collins back. "Henry, forget the rumors, forget the investigation. Grace and Ethan, they're staying, and I don't want to hear any more doubts." Henry hesitated. "Understood, sir." But even as he ended the call, a part of Michael still felt that gnawing fear, the fear of losing them, the fear of trusting again. But as he stepped out into the garden, watching Ethan chase a butterfly with childlike joy, and saw Grace smiling softly from the porch, Michael knew that some things were worth the risk. Some things were worth trusting in, and for the first time in a long time, Michael wanted to believe that happiness was something he could hold on to. Michael Carter's fear didn't vanish, but he refused to let it control him. He made a choice. He would be present. He would be there for Ethan and Grace, not just as a provider, but as a grandfather and a friend. So he made time. Time that he used to spend buried in business meetings and financial reports was now spent in the garden, kicking a soccer ball with Ethan, or in the kitchen, where he and Grace tried to cook dinner together and often ended up laughing over their failed attempts. And as Michael's world shifted, so did his relationship with Grace. She grew more relaxed, her laughter more genuine. She began to trust him, not just as the wealthy man who had rescued them, but as a man who genuinely cared. But one Sunday morning, as they sat together at the breakfast table, Ethan looked up with wide, curious eyes. "Grandpa," he asked, his voice small but curious, "can we go visit Dad's grave? I want to see him." Michael's chest tightened. It had been months since he had visited the cemetery, since that fateful day when he first saw Ethan sitting by David's grave. So much had changed, but the thought of returning there, of standing before the cold, silent headstone, sent a chill through him. "Of course, Ethan," Michael managed, forcing a smile. "We can go this afternoon." Grace looked at him, a gentle understanding in her eyes. She knew how difficult this was for him, but she also knew that Ethan needed this, and perhaps so did Michael. That afternoon, they drove together, the city fading behind them as the quiet, tree-lined roads led them to the cemetery. Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel, memories swirling in his mind, memories of David as a child, laughing, running through the garden, and then the bitter memory of that fateful night when everything changed. When they arrived, the air was crisp, the sunlight filtering through the rustling leaves. Ethan clutched a small bouquet of white lilies, his little hands trembling slightly. Grace stood close to him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. As they approached the grave, Michael's breath caught. The polished stone stood just as he remembered, the name David Carter carved into its surface, cold and unchanging. Ethan stepped forward, carefully placing the lilies at the base of the headstone. He stared at the name for a long moment, then whispered, "Hi, Dad. It's me, Ethan. I never got to meet you, but Grandpa tells me stories about you. He says you were really brave. I hope I can be like you." Michael felt his throat tighten, a wave of emotion crashing over him. He had never imagined this standing here, beside his grandson, sharing this moment of grief and love. Grace knelt beside Ethan, gently brushing his hair back. "Your dad would be so proud of you, sweetheart, just like I am." Ethan smiled, his wide eyes shining with tears. "Do you think he can hear us?" "I believe he can," Grace whispered, her voice thick with emotion. And then Ethan turned, his gaze fixing on Michael. "Grandpa, do you miss him?" Michael's heart seemed to shatter. He sank to his knees beside Ethan, pulling the boy into a tight hug. "Every day, Ethan," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Every single day." For a long moment they stayed like that, three figures embracing in the quiet, sunlit cemetery. But as they stood to leave, a sense of peace settled over Michael. It wasn't just grief. He felt it was love. Love for David, love for Ethan, love for Grace. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. On the drive home, Ethan's voice broke the comfortable silence. "Grandpa?" "Yes, Ethan?" "Can you tell me more stories about Dad?" Michael smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "I'd love to." And so he did. As the sun set beyond the city skyline, Michael shared stories of David, his wild imagination, his mischievous grin, the way he always wanted to help others. Ethan listened with wide-eyed wonder, his laughter filling the car. But it wasn't just Ethan who needed to hear those stories. Michael did too, because with every word, every memory, he felt a part of the pain fading, replaced by something new, something brighter. Hope. That night, after Ethan had fallen asleep, Michael found Grace sitting on the porch, a soft smile on her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for taking us there, for sharing him with us." Michael sat beside her, the cool night breeze ruffling his hair. "Thank you for giving me another chance." They sat in comfortable silence, the stars twinkling above, a sense of peace settling over them both. And Michael knew that he hadn't just found a grandson, he had found a family. Michael Carter's life continued to change, but not just because of Ethan's laughter or Grace's quiet smiles. It changed because, for the first time in years, Michael chose to be present. He chose to wake up early on Saturdays and make pancakes with Ethan, even if he burned half of them. He chose to take Grace and Ethan to the park, where they fed ducks and played catch. He even chose to be vulnerable, to talk about David, to share stories of his son that he had once locked away. But even as Michael's world grew brighter, a shadow still lingered. Grace. She was here. She laughed. She smiled. She even began to trust Michael. But there were moments, brief, flickering moments, when he saw a sadness in her eyes, a fear she tried to hide. One evening, as they sat together in the cozy warmth of the living room, Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch, his head resting on Michael's shoulder. Grace stood in the doorway, her gaze soft but distant. "Grace," Michael whispered, careful not to wake Ethan. "Are you okay?" She hesitated, then stepped into the room, sinking into the chair across from him. I've been thinking." Michael's heart tightened. "About what?" "About us. About you, me, and Ethan." Grace's voice was steady, but there was a fragility beneath it. This life. It's wonderful, but it still feels like a dream. Like something I'm going to wake up from." "You're not going to wake up from it," Michael assured her, his voice gentle. "This is real. I promise." Grace smiled, but it was a sad smile. "I want to believe that, but it's hard. I've spent so many years trying to protect Ethan, trying to survive. I've never had anything that I didn't lose." Michael's chest ached. He carefully shifted, laying Ethan down on the couch, then moved to sit beside Grace. "I know it's hard to trust, Grace. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm not going anywhere. Neither are you. Neither is Ethan." A tear slipped down Grace's cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "Sometimes I wonder if this is all too good to be true, if one day you'll wake up and realize we're just a burden." "You are not a burden," Michael whispered, reaching out to take her hand. "Your family." Grace's fingers tightened around his. They sat in silence for a long moment, the soft crackle of the fireplace the only sound. Finally, Grace looked up, her gaze searching his. "Can you promise me something? Anything. Promise me that if you ever decide this isn't what you want, you'll be honest. Don't just let us go without saying anything." Michael's heart ached. "Grace, I will never let you go, not without a fight." For the first time, Grace's sad smile transformed into something warmer, something real. But even as she leaned against his shoulder, a part of Michael wondered, would his promise be enough? Would time be enough to heal the scars Grace carried? The next few weeks were filled with quiet moments, shared breakfasts, cozy movie nights, trips to the park where Ethan's laughter filled the air, and Michael made a point of being there, truly being there. No more late nights at the office, no more cancelled plans. He was a part of their lives now, not just a distant figure with money. But Michael also saw another side of Grace. She was strong, resilient, but she had spent so many years struggling that she still clung to a sense of independence. She refused to let Michael buy her expensive clothes or treat her to lavish gifts. Instead, she insisted on helping around the house, even cooking meals for the three of them. One rainy afternoon, as they sat together on the porch, watching the raindrops dance on the garden, Grace turned to Michael with a thoughtful expression. Michael, she began, I want to get a job. Michael blinked, surprised. A job? But you don't need to work. I can take care of everything. I know you can, and I appreciate it, but I need to feel like I'm contributing, like I'm doing something. Michael studied her, seeing the quiet determination in her eyes. This was who Grace was, a woman who had fought for everything she had, a woman who refused to be seen as a burden. All right, he agreed with a gentle smile. What do you want to do? I used to work as a waitress, Grace explained. I'm pretty good at it. But maybe I could work somewhere closer part-time, just enough to feel useful. Michael nodded. I know a few places that would be lucky to have you. Grace's smile brightened, and for the first time, Michael saw a spark of hope in her eyes. A week later, Grace started working at a cozy little cafe just down the street. It wasn't glamorous, but it was warm, friendly, and she loved it. She returned home each day with a light in her eyes, sharing stories of the customers she met, of the new recipes she tried. And Michael, who once measured his success in millions of dollars, found himself happier than he had ever been, listening to Grace talk about her simple, joyful days. But even as their lives settled into a gentle rhythm, Michael's fear remained. The fear of waking up one day to find it all gone. But he held on to a promise, the promise he made to Grace. And for now, that was enough. Grace's new job at the cozy cafe brought a sense of normalcy to her life. But it also gave her something else, confidence. She no longer felt like a guest in Michael's mansion, but like a woman with her own purpose. Each day, she returned home with a warm smile, her cheeks flushed from the bustle of the cafe, and her stories filled the dinner table with laughter. Michael noticed the change in her. She seemed lighter, more relaxed, and the quiet sadness that had once lingered in her eyes was slowly fading. Ethan, too, was thriving. He excelled in school, made friends easily, and his laughter seemed to fill the house. But with this newfound joy came a new worry. Michael couldn't shake the fear that it was all too good to be true, that something would happen to take it all away. He buried himself in the warmth of their growing family, but in the back of his mind, the fear remained. One Saturday morning, as Michael flipped pancakes in the kitchen, with Ethan cheering him on, Grace's phone buzzed on the countertop. She glanced at it, and her smile faltered slightly. "Everything okay?" Michael asked, noticing her expression. "Yeah. It's just a message from my manager," Grace replied, forcing a smile. "They need me to come in for an extra shift tomorrow." Michael nodded, but something in her voice felt off. Grace had always been honest with him, but now there was a hesitation, a flicker of something she wasn't saying. Later that evening, as they sat together in the living room, Michael tried to ignore the nagging feeling in his chest, but it only grew stronger when Grace slipped out onto the porch, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice a hushed whisper. Michael didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the tension in Grace's voice pulled him toward the window. "I told you, I can't keep doing this," Grace whispered. "I have a life here now, I can't just drop everything." A long pause. Then, "Please don't do this. Please don't make this harder than it has to be." Michael's heart pounded. Who was she talking to? What was going on? When Grace came back inside, her smile was back, but it was strained. Michael wanted to ask, to press her for answers, but he didn't. Not yet. But that night, as he lay in bed, his mind raced with worry. Was she hiding something from him? Was she planning to leave? The next day, while Grace was at work, Michael made a decision. He picked up his phone and called Henry Collins. "Henry, I need you to look into something for me discreetly." Henry didn't question him, and Michael didn't elaborate. He hated the idea of spying on Grace, but the fear gnawed at him. He couldn't lose her. He couldn't lose Ethan. 2 days later, Henry called back. "Mr. Carter, I have information," Henry said, his voice cautious. "It's about Grace." Michael's heart raced. "Go on." "She's been receiving phone calls and text messages from someone named Alex. I did some digging. He's her ex-boyfriend. They were together years ago. but he has a history of trouble debts, bad decisions. He's been pressuring her for money. Michael's grip tightened on the phone. And she's been giving it to him? Not directly, but he's been threatening her, threatening to cause trouble if she doesn't help. Michael's anger flared. How dare this man try to take advantage of Grace? How dare he try to drag her back into the darkness she had fought so hard to escape? "Don't do anything yet," Michael ordered. "I'll handle this." That evening, when Grace returned home, Michael was waiting for her in the kitchen. His expression was calm, but his eyes were intense. "Grace, can we talk?" he asked, his voice steady. She hesitated, her smile fading. "Of course, what's wrong?" Michael gestured for her to sit, and she did, nervously twisting her hands in her lap. "I know about Alex," Michael said simply. Grace's face went pale. I can explain." "You don't have to explain," Michael continued, his voice softer now. "But I need you to know that you don't have to face this alone. No one has the right to threaten you. No one has the right to take away the life you've built here." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to think I was weak." "You're not weak," Michael whispered, reaching across the table to take her hands. "You're the strongest person I know, but even strong people need help sometimes." Grace's tears spilled over, and she squeezed his hands. "I thought if I ignored him, he'd go away, but he just kept pushing. I was so scared he'd ruin everything." "He won't," Michael promised. "I'll make sure of it." The next day, Michael called Henry and instructed him to take care of the situation. Within hours, Alex received a very clear message. Any attempt to contact Grace again would result in serious legal consequences. When Grace found out, she was both relieved and worried. "Michael, you didn't have to. I didn't want you to get involved." "I know," Michael replied, "but you're not alone anymore. Neither of you are." From that day forward, a new sense of peace settled over their home. Grace no longer looked over her shoulder. Ethan continued to thrive, and Michael felt a weight lift from his chest. But as the days went by, something else changed too. Grace became more affectionate, her smiles warmer, her laughter brighter. And Michael realized that he wasn't just trying to protect Grace because she was Ethan's mother. He was falling in love with her. But that terrified him, because love meant vulnerability. Love meant the risk of losing everything. But looking at Grace, her gentle smile, the light in her eyes as she played with Ethan, Michael knew it was a risk he was willing to take. As the days turned into weeks, Michael Carter's feelings for Grace only grew stronger. He had never expected this. Never expected that his life, once so empty and cold, would be filled with warmth, laughter, and love. But love also brought fear. Fear of losing it, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of watching everything he cared about slip away again. Yet Michael tried to push those fears aside. Instead, he focused on being present for Ethan, for Grace, for this new life they had built together. One crisp autumn afternoon, they were walking together in the park. Leaves crunched beneath their feet, and Ethan ran ahead, his laughter ringing out like a melody. Grace walked beside Michael, her arm linked with his, her cheek flushed with the cool breeze. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Michael admitted quietly. Grace looked up at him, her eyes warm and curious. "What do you mean?" "I never thought I'd feel happy," Michael confessed. "After losing David, I thought I'd never feel anything but regret." Grace's expression softened, and she squeezed his arm gently. "David would want you to be happy, and I think he'd be glad you found us." Michael smiled, a warmth blooming in his chest, but just as quickly, that familiar fear crept in. "Grace, I need to tell you something." She stopped, turning to face him. "What is it?" I never planned for this. I never thought I'd meet you or Ethan. I never thought I'd have a family again." Grace's eyes searched his, her smile fading slightly. "Michael, what are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that I love you," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. "I love you, Grace, and I love Ethan. I can't imagine my life without either of you." For a moment, Grace simply stared at him, her eyes wide with surprise. But then, a soft smile spread across her lips, and she leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to his cheek. "I love you too, Michael." Michael's heart soared, a sense of relief and joy washing over him. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and for the first time in so many years, he felt truly, completely alive. But love was not without its challenges. A few days later, as they sat together in the living room, Grace's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression tightened slightly. "Everything okay?" Michael asked, noticing the change in her. "It's just my sister Rachel," Grace explained. "We haven't talked in a long time, but she just texted me. She wants to see me." Michael nodded, trying to remain calm. "That's good, isn't it?" I don't know," Grace admitted. "We didn't part on good terms. She never really approved of me being with David. She thought I was trying to take advantage of him." Michael frowned. "Grace, anyone who truly knows you would never think that." Grace's gaze softened. "I hope so. But I think I should see her. I want to try to make things right." "Of course," Michael agreed, though a part of him still felt a pang of anxiety. Would Rachel try to pull Grace away? Would she tell Grace she didn't belong here? A few days later, Grace left to meet her sister, and Michael found himself pacing the living room, unable to focus on anything even Ethan noticed. "Grandpa, are you okay?" Ethan asked, looking up from his drawing. Michael forced a smile. "I'm fine, buddy. Just thinking." Hours seemed to crawl by, but finally, the front door opened and Grace stepped inside. Her expression was a mix of relief and exhaustion. "How did it go?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "It was emotional," Grace admitted, sinking onto the couch. "We talked for a long time. She apologized for everything, for judging me, for not being there when I needed her." Michael's shoulders relaxed slightly. "And you? Are you okay?" Grace smiled, a soft, genuine smile. "I am. And I realized something today. No matter what Rachel thinks, no matter what anyone thinks, I belong here with you and Ethan. This is my family." Michael felt a warmth bloom in his chest, and he crossed the room, pulling Grace into his arms. "You're right. This is your home. Our home." Michael Carter felt a new sense of peace settle over his life. Grace was happy, Ethan was thriving, and the dark, empty mansion that had once echoed with silence was now filled with laughter, warmth, and love. But even in this happiness, Michael couldn't escape the memories of his son, David. He thought of him every day, his bright smile, his mischievous laugh, his relentless drive to make a difference in the world. But he also thought of the mistakes he had made as a father, the long hours he spent at work, the times he missed David's school events, the arguments they had over Michael's obsession with success. One rainy evening, as Michael and Ethan played a game of chess by the fireplace, Ethan looked up with a curious expression. "Grandpa, can you tell me more about my dad?" Ethan asked. "What was he like?" Michael's chest tightened. "Your dad he was amazing. Smart, kind, a bit stubborn, just like you." Ethan smiled. "Did you and Dad always get along?" Michael hesitated. He had always tried to focus on the good memories, the happy times, but he knew he couldn't hide the truth forever. "Not always," Michael admitted, his voice soft. "Sometimes we argued. I was too focused on work. I thought I was doing what was best for him, but I didn't realize how much I was missing." Ethan's smile faded slightly. "Did you tell him you loved him?" Michael's throat tightened. "I did. But maybe Maybe not as often as I should have. Ethan reached out, his small hand resting on Michael's. I think he knew, Grandpa. I think he knew you loved him. Michael felt tears sting his eyes, but he managed a gentle smile. Thank you, Ethan. Later that night, as Michael sat alone in his study, his thoughts wandered back to the last conversation he had with David. It had been an argument, a foolish, pointless argument about career choices, about David wanting to pursue social work instead of joining the family business. You're wasting your potential, Michael had shouted. You have a brilliant mind. You could be anything you want. Why would you throw it away? Because I want to help people, Dad, David had shouted back, not just make more money. Those were the last words they had exchanged before the accident, and for years, Michael had lived with the crushing weight of regret, the memory of that bitter argument haunting him. But now, with Ethan in his life, Michael had a chance to do things differently, to be the kind of grandfather he had never been as a father. The next morning, Michael made a decision. After dropping Ethan off at school, he drove to the cemetery. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still overcast, grey clouds swirling above. He stood before David's grave, his heart heavy. David, he whispered, his voice trembling. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I wish I could tell you that now. I wish I could tell you how proud I am of you, how much I love you. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves around him, and for a moment, Michael closed his eyes, letting the wind brush against his face. He didn't know if David could hear him, but he hoped with all his heart. When Michael returned home, he found Grace in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared lunch. You look thoughtful, she remarked, glancing at him. I went to see David, Michael admitted, his voice calm but emotional. I told him I was sorry. Grace's smile was gentle. I'm sure he heard you. Michael stepped closer, his hand resting on hers. Grace, thank you. Thank you for giving me a second chance. Thank you for being here. Grace leaned in, her cheek resting against his shoulder. You gave us a second chance too, Michael. We wouldn't be here without you. As they stood together in the kitchen, Michael felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He couldn't change the past. He couldn't undo the mistakes he made with David. But he could be here now for Grace, for Ethan, for the family they had become. And he knew, in his heart, that David would be proud. Michael Carter's world continued to brighten with each passing day. His mornings were filled with laughter as he made pancakes with Ethan, who always insisted on adding extra chocolate chips. His afternoons were spent walking in the garden with Grace, her gentle voice telling him stories of her childhood, stories that he realized he cherished just as much as his own. But as the leaves began to turn golden and the crisp autumn air filled the garden, Michael found himself thinking about something important. He didn't just want this to be a temporary chapter in their lives. He didn't want to simply be the man who helped Grace and Ethan. He wanted to be a family officially. One evening, as they sat together in the cozy warmth of the living room, Ethan curled up between them with a storybook. Michael's heart swelled with love. He looked at Grace, who was laughing softly at Ethan's dramatic attempts at reading the story. Grace, Michael said, his voice steady but gentle. She looked up, her smile warm. Yes? There's something I've been thinking about, something I want to ask. Grace's smile softened, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. Go ahead. Michael took a deep breath, his gaze moving between her and Ethan. I want us to be a family. Not just in words, but legally, officially. Grace's eyes widened slightly. Michael, what do you mean? I mean, I want to adopt Ethan. I want him to be my grandson, not just in my heart, but in name. And I want to ask you to stay with me, to build a life together as a family. Grace's breath caught, and for a moment, she was speechless. But then, a warm, radiant smile spread across her face, and her eyes filled with tears. Oh, Michael. Yes, I want that too. Ethan's wide eyes darted between them, his little face lighting up. Really? Does that mean you're really my grandpa? Michael chuckled, his own eyes misty. Yes, Ethan. It means I'm really your grandpa, and you're really my grandson. Ethan launched himself into Michael's arms, hugging him tightly. I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, Ethan. So much. Grace leaned in, her hand resting gently on Michael's shoulder. Thank you, she whispered, for giving us a home, for loving us. Michael looked at her, his voice tender. No, Grace. Thank you for bringing life back into my world. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Michael met with his lawyer, ensuring that the adoption process would be smooth and that Grace and Ethan would be protected. He wanted them to know that they were truly a part of his life, not just guests in his home, but family. Ethan was overjoyed, telling everyone at school that he was going to be officially adopted by his grandpa, and Grace, though a little overwhelmed, seemed happier than ever. But one rainy afternoon, as they sat together by the fireplace, Grace's expression grew thoughtful. Michael, are you sure about this? She whispered. I don't want you to feel pressured. I don't want you to do this just because you feel guilty about the past. Michael leaned closer, taking her hands in his. Grace, I'm not doing this because of guilt. I'm doing this because I love you. I love Ethan. You're my family, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Tears filled Grace's eyes, and she leaned in, kissing him softly. Then I'm the luckiest woman in the world. The adoption process was finalized a month later. Michael stood proudly beside Grace as they signed the papers, and Ethan's smile was so wide it seemed to light up the entire room. That night, they celebrated with a small party at home. Ethan ran through the house, waving his adoption certificate like a trophy, while Grace and Michael shared a quiet, joyful embrace in the kitchen. Congratulations, Grandpa, Grace whispered, her head resting on his shoulder. Congratulations, Grandma, Michael teased, and they both laughed. But as the evening drew to a close, as Michael tucked Ethan into bed and kissed his forehead, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. He hadn't just found a family. He had found a future. Winter came, blanketing the city in a soft layer of snow, but the warmth in Michael Carter's home only grew. Grace, Ethan, and Michael settled into a rhythm, a real family rhythm. They baked cookies together, watched old Christmas movies by the fireplace, and laughed as they decorated the enormous tree in the living room. One crisp, clear evening, as they walked together through the snow-covered park, Ethan ran ahead, his laughter echoing in the frosty air. Michael and Grace walked side by side, her hand slipping comfortably into his. Do you ever think about how we got here? Grace asked, her breath misting in the cold air. Michael smiled. Every day, and I still can't quite believe it. Grace leaned against him, her cheek brushing his shoulder. Me neither, but I'm so glad we found each other. As they continued walking, Ethan suddenly turned back, waving excitedly, Grandpa! Grandma! Look! They hurried to where he stood, just in time to see a flurry of snowflakes swirling down, sparkling in the light of the park lanterns. It's so pretty, Ethan whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. Michael smiled, his arm around Grace. It is, but not as pretty as the family I have right here. Ethan beamed, and Grace leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to Michael's cheek. Back at the house, they warmed up with hot cocoa. Ethan curled up beside the fireplace with his favorite blanket. Grace and Michael shared a quiet moment by the window, watching the snow fall softly outside. I was thinking, Michael whispered, his voice tender. Maybe we should take a family trip, just the three of us, somewhere warm, somewhere we can make memories. Grace's smile grew. I'd love that. And I know Ethan would too. Michael reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. Thank you, Grace, for believing in me, for giving me a chance to be a better man. You've always been a good man, Michael, Grace whispered. You just needed a reason to believe it. As the days passed, Michael planned the trip, and Ethan's excitement grew. But it wasn't just the trip that made Michael's heart swell. It was the quiet, everyday moments, tucking Ethan in at night, sharing quiet conversations with Grace in the kitchen, even just sitting together watching a movie. One snowy morning, as Michael was reading in the study, Ethan burst in, his eyes wide with excitement. Grandpa, I got an award at school," he shouted, waving a colorful certificate. Michael stood, his smile wide. "That's amazing, Ethan. I'm so proud of you." Ethan ran into his arms, hugging him tightly. "I couldn't have done it without you and Mom." Michael's heart swelled. "Oh, I think you could have. You're an incredible kid." But as he hugged Ethan, he felt something else, a sense of peace, a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known in years. His home wasn't just a house anymore. It was a place filled with love, with laughter, with life. That evening, as they sat together by the fireplace, the soft glow of the flames dancing in their eyes, Michael looked at Grace and Ethan, his heart full. "I used to think I was living my dream," Michael said quietly. "A big house, a successful business, more money than I could ever spend. But it was all empty. I didn't even realize it. Until I met you." Grace leaned against him, her hand resting on his chest. "And I used to think that struggling was just my life, that I had to fight for everything, always on my own. But then, I found you." Ethan, curled up between them, smiled sleepily. "And I have the best family ever." Michael chuckled, leaning down to kiss the top of Ethan's head. "Yes, you do. And so do I." As the snow continued to fall outside, and the warmth of the fire wrapped around them, Michael Carter finally understood something he had missed for so long. Family wasn't just about blood. It wasn't just about memories of the past. It was about love, about choosing each other every single day. And as he sat there, holding the two people he loved most in the world, he knew that his life was complete. Together, they had built something beautiful, something real, a family. The story of Michael Carter, Grace, and Ethan is a powerful reminder that it is never too late to rediscover the true meaning of family and love. For older American viewers, this story shows that even in the later years of life, there is always a chance for redemption, connection, and healing. Michael spent years chasing success, building a fortune, and burying his regrets. But all the wealth in the world could not replace the emptiness left by his lost son. It was only when he opened his heart to Grace and Ethan that he discovered what truly mattered: family, love, and the simple joy of being there for those you care about. The lesson is clear. True happiness doesn't come from material wealth, but from the relationships we build, the memories we share, and the moments we cherish. No matter your age, you can always choose to make things right, to forgive, and to embrace the people who bring light into your life. In a world that often rushes by, take a moment to appreciate those who matter most. Love them fiercely. Be present. Because in the end, love and family are the only legacies that truly last.